What is up, everybody? I am HoopsandHipHop, and welcome back to another episode of the Pokeblock Podcast. First thing I want to mention is if this recording sounds a little bit different to what the podcasts typically sound like, it's probably because I actually just recently moved and I'm in a new space. I got a new studio set up, but it's like not completely set up, so that sort of could affect the sound and the reverberation and stuff like that. I've done my best to kind of do what I can so far into the moving process to make things work, but if it's still a little slightly off, I do apologize. I may or may not mess with actually doing music on this episode, just to have background music. That's something I've thought about doing, so maybe this is the time to try it. I don't know, but either way, just wanted to let you guys know I'm working on that if that's off and stuff like that. So this week has just been a crazy week for me. I've moved, I went to a wedding, there was a funeral that I had to go to. I haven't even been able to do videos because of all of that. I've been throwing out remixes onto my main channel that I've had in the backlog, so overall, it's been really crazy, so hopefully you can cope with me on this week. It shouldn't be too bad, though. I'm not too concerned about it. Just wanted to mention it just in case. And yeah, other than that, though, we do have a really good and interesting topic this week. This is something that I've been thinking about recently. It's kind of floated around in my head every now and then, and I just thought it would make for a good topic for this week's podcast. It has to do, basically, as the title would suggest, what Pokemon might be like when its founding fathers, essentially, quote-unquote, particularly Junichi Masuda, when they are not really a part of the franchise anymore. And, like, once it's handed down to the next generation, so to speak, what might Pokemon be like? How might it operate? It's going to be a really fascinating discussion, and I'm really excited for it. But before we do get into it, I do need to thank our sponsors as always, because they help us do what we do here and keep us going, and we really appreciate them. So without any further ado, today's episode is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. Did you know that in order to get your stimulus check, you had to have filed your taxes for 2018 or the 2019 tax year? If you haven't filed for 2018 or 2019, there's good news. The Tax Defense Group can rush e-file your taxes. They know that millions of Americans are struggling, and they want to make sure you get your stimulus check sooner rather than later. So call the Tax Defense Group today at 800-850-7973 to get started. That number again is 800-850-7973, and you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Writer Junkie. Due to the global pandemic and the economic downturn, Writer Junkie is offering their resume writing service for only $100, and with a 3-day turnaround, you cannot beat that price and delivery time. So call Writer Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online at writerjunkie.com. Mention that you heard this ad on UCast Studios, and they will get right to work. Alrighty, so into the meat of the discussion I wanted to have today. Like I said, the gist of it is just the topic of once Junichi Masuda sort of more or less leaves the franchise, once he stops really being heavily involved in the creation of Pokemon games the way he is now, and once some of the other main people involved in Pokemon, some of those founding members like Ken Sugimori, obviously Satoshi Tajiri, Shigeki Morimoto, people like that, once they're kind of once they're gone, what is Pokemon gonna do once it's got completely new people into the fold? It's kind of a sad topic to think about, because obviously these people, these original founding members of Game Freak and the creators of Pokemon, they're heroes to us. I mean, Satoshi Tajiri, he is a very much a recluse type of guy, doesn't really come out in the spotlight a lot, but he's a legend. He created the biggest media franchise in the world. Like, he is an absolute god. And then you've got Ken Sugimori, who is an absolute god as well. He's the main designer of a lot of Pokemon. He is the main artist for the Pokemon franchise. He created this art style that Pokemon uses. Absolutely phenomenal. You've got Junichi Masuda. Obviously, he's been the sort of the face of Pokemon for the bulk of its existence, which we'll get into kind of the timeline in a minute here. But he's also an amazing composer as well. He composed like so many amazing, iconic, nostalgic themes in the Pokemon franchise. You've got Shigeki Morimoto, who does a lot of the battle related stuff. He created Mew. So there's just so many people involved in the inception of Pokemon, the creation of Pokemon, that, like I said, were the founding fathers of the franchise, that are still involved to this day. But inevitably, as things continue to move forward and as we continue to get more Pokemon games, as fortunately as we do, time, obviously, just like everything else in life, it moves on. We are nearly 25 years into the creation of the franchise, and even though the people involved aren't like terribly old, they are like sort of old. I believe Junichi Masuda is in his 50s, Satoshi Tajiri is in his 50s. I think they're all around that same age, so I mean, they're getting up there, and I mean, they're not getting up there. If anyone listening to this is in their 50s, that's not old. Like, you're good. But you guys know what I mean. You get the gist. Especially for, like, working, like, if you're a 50-year-old or 55-year-old and you're in your career or whatever, you roughly have about, like, maybe, like, 10 years or whatever before you could retire, because retiring's like 65 or something like that, depending on the country. So basically, like, you're getting to the end of your career, so to speak. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, because with where we are at in Pokemon, we are starting to get to that point where this kind of sort of needs to become a discussion as to what is going to happen when these people start to slowly kind of call it a day on their career and kind of just slowly step back into the background in terms of handling the franchise itself. We have already seen this sort of happen to a certain extent. Right now, I would call what we are in sort of a transitional phase, because you're very slowly starting to see more people into the fold and taking on bigger roles. We just barely had the announcement of, I tried to look up his name, I couldn't quite find his name, but the Sword and Shield Expansion Pass director, it's not Shigeru Mori, it's not Junichi Masuda, it's this new guy, I believe his last name is Tani, and he's directing the expansion. And then you have like different other things, like James Turner was the art director for Sword and Shield. He's only been on he's only been at Game Freak since Gen 5, and obviously kind of took over for this game from Ken Sugimori. And then you've got a statement made by Junichi Masuda, who said during Let's Go's time in the Sun that it would probably be the last Pokemon game he directed himself. So a lot of things are taking place right now that show that we're sort of in a transitional period for the management of the franchise, which is to be expected. And so that's kind of why, like, specifically when it was revealed that the director of the Sword and Shield expansion was this Tawny guy, I apologize for not knowing his last name, or his first name rather. I tried to look it up and no one had the director of the expansion pass listed that I could find, so it was only in the direct. But this is kind of that instance where they revealed him as the director, and just the different way that the expansion pass seemed to go in terms of the content that it was bringing forward. It got me thinking about how Pokemon might be different, what changes we could see in terms of philosophy and stuff like that, and so that's why I wanted to talk about it today. But it's not like it's not like this whole idea of Pokemon just like changing leadership and all that stuff. It's not like that's necessarily a new idea, because we have sort of seen it once in Pokemon, and that was in the early days when the baton was passed, if you will, from Satoshi Tajiri to Junichi Masuda. Many people know Junichi Masuda as the face of Pokemon, but he's not the creator. The creator is Satoshi Tajiri, and Satoshi Tajiri he directed the first two generations of Pokemon games, so Red, Blue, Yellow, and Gold, Silver, Crystal. After that, he basically gave directing duties to Junichi Masuda and sort of just decided to remain in the background. It's really hard to say what kind of involvement he has in the Pokemon games now. He is still at Game Freak, but he is so under the radar. He very much likes to remain kind of out of the public eye, and so it's really hard to say what kind of involvement he's having. He does get those executive producer credits on the games, but that more or less just boils down to the fact that he created the franchise and he founded Game Freak and everything, so that's why he's there. So overall, it's really tough to say. I would say he probably has somewhat of a consulting role at this point. Like, people ask him for advice and his opinion on things, and he probably has, I mean, you can't really not take the opinion of the creator of the franchise especially when he's still there. So, so he probably definitely has a consulting role of some kind, but past that, it probably isn't a whole lot. So, we have had this transition before where Tajiri was hardcore directing Pokemon games. He was in the thick of it, and then he kind of faded into the background and let Junichi Masuda take over. And since then, obviously, we've had a lot of really great Pokemon games. Junichi Masuda, he started his foray into directing the Pokemon games with Ruby and Sapphire, which was sort of a love letter to his childhood like it was to Satoshi's, so we very much saw his personal imprint right away. And then obviously we got amazing games in the future, and like past that, like Diamond and Pearl, Black and White, X and Y. So Junichi Masuda has done a great job, just like Satoshi Tajiri did a great job, but it's not really the same level of transition going from essentially one director to another, because you still had all those founding members there. What we're seeing right now is a situation where each individual member of that core, like Fab 5 or Fab however many there are, they're each individually now starting to slowly fade back instead of just the one. Because like I said, Ken Sugimori was not replaced, but relieved, I guess you could say, by James Turner, who was the art director for Sword and Shield, and he's kind of taken more of a back step, I would say. He still obviously is there, he consults, I'm sure he does some artwork, but he was not the art director. He was his duties were sort of more in the background and not as intense as they have been in the past. Same thing with Junichi Masuda. Like I said, he said that Let's Go was probably going to be the last time he directed a game. And now Shigeru Omori, who has been around in the franchise since Ruby and Sapphire, I believe, so it's not like he's new, but he has sort of slowly started to become the next face of Pokemon, just like Junichi Masuda became the face from Satoshi Tajiri, because he directed Sun and Moon, he's directed Sword and Shield, I want to say he directed Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire as well, so he has been a director of several huge Pokemon games. So I think slowly but surely he is going to start to become the main face from Masuda. And then you've also got other people like the Tawny character, or the Tawny person. I feel so bad that I don't know his name. He deserves more respect than that. But we've got Tawny, who is directing the Sword and Shield expansion pass, and he was like particularly young when they showed him on screen in the expansion pass direct, or the Pokemon direct, and that's kind of why I got thinking about this, because the expansion specifically is going in a very bold direction. Like I've talked about it before, but you've got new Reggies being added, you've got Galarian forms of legendary Pokemon being added, the whole map of both of parts of the expansion are they are completely open world. You've got just the fact that they're expansions in general, as opposed to like new third games. Like, I would say the one word to describe the expansions and what they're doing is bold. They're going in a very bold direction, and so part of me wonders if this is a result of the director, if it's a result of the change in leadership there. Obviously, what Game Freak does with Pokemon is not going to be just the director of that specific game's decision, but he obviously is going to have a lot of say in the matter. And so it makes me wonder, if you get someone like Tawny in the fold, and maybe he rises up and becomes like the one of the new head honchos of Pokemon as time goes on, because maybe they liked what he did, he basically just got promoted to that position. Would we see more of that kind of bold direction, those bold moves made like we're seeing in the expansion? Possibly. It's a very, very interesting thing to think about, because there have been a lot of things that Junichi Masuda, as the head of Pokemon, obviously, has sort of implored in terms of his philosophy. I can't really cite anything specific, but Pokemon, in terms of its structure, the way the games are built, certain things that are added or not added into the game, are done because Junichi Masuda thinks a certain way. Like, for instance, we did not get the Battle Frontier in Oraz because he believed, and I'm paraphrasing, so don't crucify him if I misquote him, but he basically said something to the effect of he didn't think that people would dedicate the time to playing the Battle Frontier in this day and age where there's so many like mobile games and other things going on, and so they just didn't include it. That was something that he decided. Obviously, with the whole situation concerning Sword and Shield, they made a joint decision that it would just be really hard to include all the Pokemon and stuff like that. And so these kinds of things are... I mean, there's a lot that goes into them. There's a lot of thought, and it's not just on Masuda. But at the end of the day, he does have a big say, and his philosophies and his priorities when it comes to what he wants to do with the franchise, that's going to affect what happens. If we had, like, for instance, if there was someone else that was in the director's chair and they said, you know what, I think adding new features into the games and having new gameplay modes is great, which is one of the reasons why Masuda sort of favored cutting the national decks as opposed to trying to cram them all in, because one of the things they cited was just wanting to have room to have more actual gameplay modes and mechanics and features and all that stuff, and be able to dedicate the time to that as opposed to dedicating the time to getting every single Pokemon in the game now that there's a million. That was one of the many reasons. But if you get someone in the fold and in the director's chair who feels like, no, you know what, I want to prioritize the Pokemon over the gameplay features, then that's how you end up with all the Pokemon in the game as opposed to maybe some gameplay features and things like that. So it's a really interesting kind of fine line, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying that Junichi Masuda is the reason why everything is wrong with Pokemon. That's absolutely not the case. Pokemon would not be nearly as good as it is without him, but I'm just using that as an example of how who is in charge can affect the direction that the franchise takes. And before we move on really quick, I do want to give another quick shout out to Tax Defense Group. If you need your taxes done, give them a call, 800-850-7973. Visit thetaxdefensegroup.com. They will get you hooked up with just some awesome service there. And we've got Writer Junkie. If you need resume for your next dream job, hit them up, call them at 805-587-7966. Mention that, or check them out at writerjunkie.com. Be sure to let them know that we sent you, and they will help you out. But with, it basically is just, all of this is just kind of an interesting discussion to show how, the people affect the games. I mean, that's a very obvious statement. I don't know why I put it like that, but you guys know what I mean. And I think it's going to be like, I really hope that Junichi Masuda, Ken Sugimori, Satoshi Tajiri, Shigeki Morimoto, all those original people, I hope they stay around as long as possible, because they're absolute legends. They created the thing that I love almost more than anything else. They made my childhood what it is. They're absolute legends, and they're still putting out amazing games. So they obviously are welcome to be here as long as they want to be here, and I hope they're around for a really long time. But as almost sad as it is to have to face the reality of, once it does come time for them to be like, you know what, I gotta call it a day, and they hand it over to someone else, then you're handing it over. You're not only handing it over to someone different, you're handing it over to a new generation, because obviously you got to give it to someone who's going to be there for the long haul moving forward. And so they're going to be younger, they're going to be part of a new generation that has different views. I know I've heard stories, or I've seen articles or bits of info that there are actually people, I believe, working on the Pokemon games who actually began playing them as younger kids. I don't think they were like kids, but they were younger, and they were sort of like, I guess, like kid, teenage type years, and they had started playing the Pokemon games before they actually worked on them. And those are the kinds of people that we're going to be getting in terms of new people working on Pokemon games within the next several years, are people who grew up playing the Pokemon games and now are working on them, because we're just to that point where those people are older, we're adults, we can obviously, like, we are old enough to now work on games like that, and inevitably that's what's going to happen, is you're going to have people who started out playing that are now working on the games, which is going to provide a whole new different perspective, because obviously, even though no one really knows Pokemon better than the boys over at Game Freak right now, I think having a perspective of someone who was a fan first and played the games and saw it from a fan's perspective, who now would be in the driver's seat, I think that's going to take on a whole new bit of significance, because there's obviously lots of things that fans personally would like to see better. There's like the distribution of mythical Pokemon, and there's obviously all the stuff that's going on with Sword and Shield. And so I feel like that kind of perspective could really help out a lot, because you're going to have someone who, I mean, Game Freak, I would say, is pretty sympathetic right now already to fan requests and fan feedback, because they're addressing it all the time in an attempt to make the games better. But I think just having that kind of perspective from the get-go, where they have more of that knowledge right off the bat, I think that could actually help tremendously and could provide for some really cool scenarios. And I think that's kind of where the expansion pass comes in, and I mean, we'll have to see what happens moving forward, but I feel like the expansion pass and the direction it's heading, especially with the Crown Tundra part, I feel like that could really be a good, it could be the start of maybe the kind of things we see in Pokemon games moving forward, because the things in the expansion that are being added, once again, like Regis, Galarian forms of legendary Pokemon, those types of things, those are the types of things that like are sort of like, they're swinging for the fences, home run type of moves. They're bold, as I said earlier, and they also seem like the kind of thing that a fan would make. Like regional variants for legendary Pokemon, before all this went down, that seemed impossible. That seemed something that would come out of a fan game, yet here it is. Same thing with the Regis. It didn't really seem like we would get Regis of other types, even though the concept was there. It just seemed like something that Game Freak wouldn't do, but now it's happening. So, like, could we see in the future more of those types of big moves where you get these crazy things that you only ever really thought could happen in fan games, just because it just didn't seem realistic otherwise? Time will tell on that, but I feel like it's going to be very interesting moving forward past the expansion to see if that sort of thing happens, because if it does continue to happen, then I think Pokemon is headed in a very good direction, because what they're doing in the expansion right now with the types of things they're adding, those are the types of things they need to do moving forward. Those are the bits of content that really get people excited and hyped about Pokemon games. So hopefully they will continue to make those types of bold moves, because those are the things that really get people excited. Those are the kinds of things that people really want, and I think that type of content, those types of features are going to be, it's going to make for the best Pokemon games possible, in my opinion, if they continue to do those sorts of things. Speaking of, I think one of those sorts of things is going to be possibly in the Diamond and Pearl remakes, which I really hope they add, because that would once again give me another feel that they're heading in that sort of direction, and ultimately what I feel is the best direction for the franchise to head into, and that would be Sinnoh forms for other Pokemon that are not from Sinnoh. So basically regional variants for the Sinnoh region that we previously didn't have before, since regional variants were created after Sinnoh was introduced. I think that kind of addition would be huge. Like, it would be super huge. And I think it should happen because it just makes sense, since regional variants, the concept itself is just a concept of, like, it's a worldwide concept. It's not the type of thing that's going to happen one place and not the other, especially since they've introduced it in Galar and Alola. So now that they've done that, they kind of, like, it just for the sake of consistency with the Pokemon world and the Pokemon themselves, I feel like they have to basically have it in all future regions to a certain degree. Otherwise, things just get really inconsistent and weird, and it would just not make people happy in general, but on top of just not making sense within the world they've created. So I feel like it has to be a consistent thing moving forward because of that. I'm crossing my fingers that it will be. But just the idea of having regional variants in a region we've already been to that we haven't seen, because obviously the regional variant mechanic was introduced after, I think that would be phenomenal. You probably would have to do it with regions that came after Sinnoh, because we've already seen every Pokemon through Gen 4 in the Sinnoh region, obviously, and they were their regular forms. We saw that Diamond, Pearl, Platinum. But the other Pokemon from Gens 5, 6, 7, and 8, we have not seen in the Sinnoh region natively. So I think those would be the Pokemon you have to target for Sinnoh forms if they did that, which would be amazing, because it would obviously exclude Kanto for one, which they did do a really good job of having more than just Kanto Pokemon in Sword and Shield for the regional variants. But just having there be none at all, and them being sort of forced to be able to only work with Gens 5 through 8, I think that would be really cool. Just to be able to really get some more attention on those other Pokemon, that would be great. So that is ultimately one of the things that I'm looking for moving forward. Not just for Sinnoh, but for, like, all the other regions moving forward, and just that kind of move in general. Those are the types of moves I want to see, because that lets me know that Game Freak knows what we want as fans, and they are making aggressive moves to try and make the games better in the way that we want them to be made better. Because ultimately, even though it sounds kind of stingy, sounds kind of like self-centered, or whatever other adjective you want to use, ultimately the games are only as good as the fans perceive them. If the fans don't like what's in the game, then they don't like what's in the game, and the fans buying the games are what make the games possible. So one way or another, you've got to please the fans, because they are sort of what keeps the train moving. Their support is what keeps things going. So I really do hope they continue in this new direction that they've got sort of established, or they're hinting at least, with the expansion. It's going to be very interesting to see, like, how the transition into new leadership happens over the next several years. I fully expect Masuda and Sugimori and all these people, they're still going to be around for a little while in terms of being at Game Freak and having a role and a say and stuff like that. They will be there, but I suspect as time goes on, within the next several years, they'll start to slowly fade more into that consulting role that Tajiri is more or less probably in right now. And then the face of the games that you'll start to see in, like, directs and stuff like that will be the likes of Shigeru Omori, for instance, or maybe maybe Tawny that's directing the Sword and Shield expansions. You'll start to see that sort of thing where they become the new face. Masuda and the boys, they're still there, but they've kind of let the other generation, the new generation, sit into the driver's seat and kind of do what they want with it and basically have most of the say. And I'll tell you, I'm really excited for what that has to bring. I think one of the things that gets me the most excited is the idea that that generation is beginning to become the generation that started as fans. And I think that'll bring a whole new perspective that will be really exciting to see. It'll be really, really exciting in terms of what it brings to the actual games moving forward. But with that being said, that is about all the time I got for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this point. Once again, by next week, I should have my studio set up, and so the audio should be a little bit better if it's not already good. It should be pretty fine, but definitely got some more stuff to set up here and whatnot, so I will work on that between now and then. Hopefully you guys had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend and a great week coming. If you have any thoughts or opinions about this, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you're on YouTube, follow wherever you're listening. And once again, we appreciate you, and we will see you next Friday for another one. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening. I'm HoopsandHipHop, and until the next one, I'll smell you guys later.